Hello friend, how are you doing today? My name is Mary, this is Happily Ever Esch, and today I am chatting my June wrap-up with you all. I had a stellar reading month in June. I really enjoyed most of what I read. I had almost 5-star reads, so between a 4.5 and a 5-star, which you can't ask for more than that. So let's just hop on into everything that I read. I will be doing a chronological order. So yeah, let's just hop on in. The first book that I finished in the month of June was Little Fires Everywhere by Celeste Ng. This is a very popular, little bit of a mystery, a little bit of a literary novel, social commentary, and I was not sure how I was going to feel about this book, but I adored it. I thought it was so cool. I feel like the atmosphere and the tone of the novel was almost satirical, kind of real life, but in this like blown out, distorted kind of way. I would say very similar to like a Desperate Housewives kind of feel, a Mean Girls, a Heathers kind of vibe. There's this distortion on real life. So it felt believable most of the reading experience, but there was just this different tone and atmosphere that's created in this novel, and it's one of the coolest things I've ever read. I feel like the way the story was told in this kind of like omniscient voice, and you're being propelled into the character's stories kind of on this revelation, made it so compelling to keep reading. And then I also think it was that voice, the like kind of this higher thing watching and crafting and telling how it was going to happen, is kind of what really added to this satirical kind of like distorted tone in the novel. We're really following a place and the people who live in this place. It's a very wealthy suburban town in Ohio that has almost been like crafted to be like the perfect place. It's community planning at its finest, I guess, is probably how the neighborhood would describe it to you. But there's also its own politics and its own kind of way of life in this little suburban town. This novel really centers around motherhood. What does it mean to be a mother? And it explores it in a really interesting way. I will say I felt like the ending was a little too... I said in another video that it like wrapped up too well, like kind of in a bow. And it wasn't like a pretty ending, but it was very kind of decisive, I feel like, in how the author wanted you to feel or interpret kind of what was going on. And I feel like for the way the atmosphere was crafted, the ending just didn't quite nail it for me. But overall, I thought that this book was really cool. I can't wait to read Everything I Never Told You. I own it. I think Celeste Ng is a talent, and I will definitely be reading anything else that she puts out. It was a wonderful read. It's highly beloved. It doesn't need my endorsement, but if you haven't picked it up and that sounds interesting to you, I highly suggest that you give it a try. Next was a book that was not for me, and I hate saying that because it's someone's memoir, and this is a new release by Jason Rosenthal, and it's called My Wife Said You May Want to Marry Me. Jason Rosenthal's wife was diagnosed with cancer in her middle-aged years, very sadly succumbed to her disease and passed away. And this is Jason Rosenthal's kind of memoir dealing with the grief of losing his wife. Amy, that's his wife's name, had written an article for the New York Times called You May Want to Marry My Husband while she was really in the process of dying, and it kind of propelled Jason to like the forefront because this essay that she wrote for the New York Times was just so well received. And I think that this book is very much a product of that kind of fame that he got from his wife's essay. I had a hard time connecting with Jason's story. It very much paints a pretty picture of his life, and you know, he's allowed to tell his story in any way that he wants, but it didn't feel very like authentic to me. It also spends a lot of time just like thanking people, which I think that's amazing that he had so many people like pouring into his life that he wanted to thank and to bring up, but it wasn't really what I thought I was going to be getting into his memoir. Overall, you know, I think if you're wanting an exploration on grief, or, you know, what kind of someone walking through what they've been through, this may be a book you want to check out. And I think if you're interested in his story, I would read Amy's article. He also has some TED Talks that's kind of the route that I wish I would have gone instead of like diving into this memoir, but that's just me. Unfortunately, yeah, it was not one of the hits this month. Next is the sequel to The War I Finally Won by Kimberly Brubaker Bradley. I adored this. We continue with Ada's story and her continuing to like find her place. I'm not gonna spoil too much about it because it is the second novel, but I thoroughly enjoyed continuing on with the story. I listened to the audiobook and I thought it was amazing. The War That Saved My Life, paired with this duology, The War I Finally Won, is some of my favorite middle grade that I've read this year for sure, but really ever. I think the exploration on childhood trauma is amazing in this book. I would give it all the stars. I highly recommend it, and like I said, the audiobook for at least the second one was really stellar, and so if you're into audiobooks, I would highly recommend it. Next, I read What We Lose. This is a novel told in vignettes by Zinzi Clemens. This also looks at grief. I'm not sure what's drawn me to all the novels, or not novels, all the books about grief this month, but this also wasn't a hit for me. So I just wonder if that's a theme that I'm just not in the mood to read about. I don't know. It really is a very short, thin novel that looks at so many different things. It looks at race and identity. Our author has lighter skin, and it's kind of her experience having lighter skin and feeling like she doesn't really have a place to be and to belong. It also kind of looks at this idea of colorism and her own family's prejudice. This is looking at the grief and the loss of a parent and kind of how our main character is dealing with it, and it also looks at her going into motherhood. And like I said, for a short little guy, it deals with a lot of topics. For me though, it was too disparate, too many things in such a short novel, because there were times and parts that I was on board and I was with her and I would like, her writing style was beautiful and I just fell into it, but then the next vignette would be like totally different. And I think that this is really artistic in her way of how she writes about grief and the grieving process, and I think that can be very true to the grieving process, and you have all these feelings and emotions. But for me, reading a novel, it didn't feel connected, and I wasn't able to just fall into her story. So that being said, I think that this author is a great writer. There would be some vignettes that it just felt like, I don't know where this writing style came, like total, curveball. But for the most part, I enjoyed her prose. I thought that it was really lovely at times. I underlined and took lots of notes. It was a very thought-provoking read. I just didn't super connect with it and love it. So overall, this was like kind of a middle-of-the-road okay book for me, but I absolutely will look for more of her work as she publishes it, because I think that she writes well. But it overall just ended up being an okay book for me. Another book I listened to on audio is a memoir by Kathleen Flynn, and that's Burnt Toast Makes You Sing Good, a memoir with recipes from an American family. I adored this book. I loved following Kathleen and her family. This is kind of told almost in like a short story essay format, but there's definitely like a linear storyline of her life running through it. I loved getting to know her family and their struggles and their adventures. I loved the recipes. This felt very true to like a Midwest experience. I'm a Midwest girl myself, and so I felt very connected with a lot of her stories. I do feel at times this was painted to be all rainbows and sunshine, and even the hard things were, I think with the distance, they kind of soften. And so, I wouldn't say that it was a perfect read for me, but it was pretty darn close. I really enjoyed it. It's one of the best memoirs that I read. I loved the food aspects of it. It was a delight, and I'm very excited that finally got to this one, and I know Kathleen Flynn has other memoirs that I would definitely be interested in looking into. The audiobook was fantastic. Highly recommend this one. Another booktube darling that I totally had so much fun with, and really it kind of blew me away way more than I was expecting, is Beach Read by Emily Henry. This is a contemporary romance novel centering around our main character who inherits this beach house from her father, where he spent time with his mistress, and this has kind of like rocked our main character's world. She was totally shocked by learning of this about her dad. Our main character is a romance novelist, and she is kind of like now disillusioned with romance as you know, her father, kind of her model hero, has kind of failed her in real life. But she's dealing with grief and not being able to write and all of these things, and lo and behold, her neighbor is also a writer, and he writes very serious literary fiction, and they enter into a challenge where they have to write in each other's genre. So there's honestly like a lot of deeper stuff in this book that I enjoyed the exploration. I loved the main characters' friendship and their dialogue. Yeah, this was a lot of fun, but like I said, there was also kind of more depth to it in exploring grief and kind of disillusionment with the world. I understand why this is getting so much praise. It was a great time. I know Emily Henry's coming out with another contemporary romance, I believe in 2021, and I can't wait. I loved her writing. I loved her characters. It was so much fun. I gobbled it up in a few days. Highly recommend that for a beach read or a stay-at-home read, whatever, summer read. It was phenomenal. And then last but certainly not least, maybe one of my favorite books that I've read this year is There by Tommy Orange. I thought that this was stellar. This has gotten a lot of buzz. Tommy Orange is a Native writer and writing about the Native experience, in particular in Oakland, and I was here for it. It was so good. This novel centers around a powwow in Oakland and all of these different characters. He writes from so many perspectives. He weaves them together in such a masterful way. I really think that this book is about stories, telling stories, and that the Native experience isn't a monolith, and there's so many different types of people and different individuals that make up the collective whole. And yeah, this book is hard. It deals with violence that's been happening to the Native community since the foundation of America, the United States as we know it today. And so it's a tough and heavy read, but I think it's so brilliantly told, and it's such an important voice to listen to. I think sadly this is maybe some of the only work that I've read by Native authors, and I know I need to do better at seeking more out, but I'm glad that this was one of the first. I think it was an amazing first, and I can't wait to continue to hear from this author. But like I said, also to search out other Native stories, as I know that that's definitely a gap in my own reading. But I listened to most of this on audio. It was phenomenally done. I highly recommend this book, but again, it doesn't need my recommendation or my stamp of approval. So many people have raved and loved this story. I was nervous about picking it up, and I remember it being at a thrift store once, and I didn't end up buying it, and now I'm like kicking myself because I wish that I owned a copy, because it's one that I definitely want to own and reread and mark up. So many fabulous moments and lines, and just, it was really great. I want to read you some quotes. One of the last things Mom said to me when we were over there, she said we shouldn't ever not tell our stories. And I just think that line really sums up what this book is, kind of maybe the thesis, if you will. All right, friends, that was everything that I read in June. Lots of stellar reads, a few duds, but that happens, right? It does, and it's okay. What did you enjoy reading this month? I'd love to chat about it down in the comments below. Have you read any of these books? Do you agree with my opinions? Do you not? I would also love to chat about that. Please like this video if you enjoyed. Please subscribe if you want to stick around and get more bookish content from me. I try to post somewhat weekly, but you know, we come and go, and it's fine. I hope that you all are having a great day. Wishing you lots of great reading in June, and I will talk to you later. Bye.